people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this bit of disappointing news you might have come across in the last 24 hours or so.
Persoon versus Hamadouche 2 is off.
According to boxing scribe Jeff Jeffries, he spoke with Maiva's trainer, who is obviously disappointed with the cancellation of the duel with Persoon. She is going to take a break and would have announced her retirement impulsively.
I was retiring.
Unofficially she did, though I think she has since gone back on that. Disappointed with the news that she wouldn't be facing Delphine Persoon on the Burj Al Arab over there in Dubai on the undercard of Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s upcoming exhibition match. I asked Jeff if Maiva's retired, and he said, I don't think so. I think she'll come around. But let's put ourselves in her shoes for a moment, getting robbed by Mayer, having an opportunity to get the win against Delphine Persoon, and she's the one that decided not to fight Maiva. She is disappointed, and I understand.
The story is it's Delphine Persoon that didn't want to fight.
You heard that right. I've never known Delphine Persoon to be the kind of fighter that would turn down a fight, would turn down a challenge, but that's the story. Delphine's the one that backed out of this thing.
A Twitter user that goes by the name Just a Minute or 2 or 3 asked,
Is Delphine still fighting in June? To which Jeff Jeffrey replied, not in June. She is looking for another opponent, a less dangerous opponent.
Those of you that saw my previous video in reference to this fight will know I picked Maiva Hamadouche to win the rematch.
I think had the fight gone through, Delphine Persoon would have been so confronted with a better, more seasoned, more experienced Maiva Hamadouche, closer to her prime than Delphine is.
And Delphine is to hers.
Make no mistake. It's a dangerous fight. It would have been a dangerous fight for both combatants. You don't just fight Maiva Hamadouche, not on a whim. And you don't just fight Delphine Persoon. Same applies to her. You don't just fight somebody like that on a whim. A fight with either of these fighters will prove to be a physically taxing fight. Such a fight for no alphabet title, no world title, no belt. Perhaps that's why Delphine Persoon backed out of this thing, because that's the story. It's Delphine that backed out of this fight. Delphine Persoon, who is about 5 years older than Maiva Hamadouche. She's 37 years old, whereas Maiva, she's a very spry 32 years old. Maiva is closer to her prime years than Delphine Persoon is. Delphine has had more professional contests.
Been in more wars.
It seems she's treading carefully these days, more careful perhaps than she did in her prime years. What else can you say?
And I hope Maiva doesn't retire.
She's still got a lot of good years left, and there are that many more intriguing fights out there for her.
Super featherweight division's buzzing.
And the sport of women's boxing's really taken off. It's getting more exposure, more attention than in previous eras of women's boxing. Thus, now's not the time to retire, not when there are that many more opportunities out there, even if this one.
Yeah, even if this fight fell through.
We'll see what happens, but for now, that's the official story. Delphine Persoon versus Maiva Hamadouche 2 has been canceled. It's not going down. Delphine, she's going to end up fighting somebody else. And who that somebody else is, we don't know at this time.
That fight's off and this one's on.
It's official. It was announced earlier today that Ellie Scotney will be taking on Argentina's own former IBF champion, bantamweight, Maria Cecilia Roman. I can only assume that this is going to be a super bantamweight contest, fought at a contracted weight of 122 pounds. Ellie Scotney don't campaign as a bantamweight. She campaigns as a super bantamweight.
Maria's moving upstairs.
Fresh off that loss to Ebony Bridges for what was Maria Cecilia Roman's IBF title at 118 pounds. She's moving upstairs, it looks like, to super bantamweight, 122 pounds, attempting to rebound off that loss. This is an opportunity for Maria, put some money in her pocket, perhaps get herself back in the winner's bracket against the less experienced fighter than Ebony Bridges, I want to say.
Because Ellie has less pro fights than Ebony.
Although she's a lot younger than both. She's a lot younger than Ebony Bridges and even younger than Maria Cecilia Roman. There's about 14 to 15 years between Ellie Scotney and Maria Cecilia Roman. Ellie Scotney's a very spry 24 years old to Maria Cecilia Roman, the former champion, who's 39, getting long in the tooth.
39-year-old legs are going to have a hard time keeping up with Ellie.
Ellie Scotney is a mobile fighter, a bouncy fighter, in and out, getting within striking distance, doing the business, and then getting back out. That's the kind of fighter she is. She's quick.
It's not constant close quarters pressure like what you get from Ebony Bridges.
Yeah, this fight ain't gonna be fought in the phone booth. That's not Ellie Scotney's calling card.
I do think she's gonna beat Maria to the punch, though.
Ellie's got fast hands. Ellie's got fast feet. And I think Maria Cecilia Roman may struggle to keep up with her. It's a situation to where it's going to be hard for Maria to judge the distance, and it may be even harder to land clean on Ellie Scotney because she's so bouncy, so quick, so in and out. Different aesthetic than the Bridges fight. Ellie Scotney on points is the conservative prediction. Ellie Scotney on points is the logical choice. It's logical to assume that Ellie, given what she's shown us so far, she might be able to beat Maria Cecilia Roman to the punch. Ellie hasn't proven to be a big puncher, not yet. She has no recorded knockouts. Her movement, her speed, her ability to judge distance, get in and out, do the business, get back out safely. Ellie's definitely quick, but she's not a big puncher. Maria Cecilia Roman, she's getting long in the tooth, but she's never been stopped. Makes Ellie Scotney on points. Logical choice. That's logical prediction. Ellie Scotney on points on the undercard of Joshua Buatsi versus Craig Richards. Look for this in May. In other news, more developments on a story that is fast developing into
More than just a story in the world of boxing.
Yeah, I mean, this is seeming less and less like boxing news. Apparently, the UAE has frozen Daniel Kinahan's assets.
But make no mistake, this does pertain to boxing.
The United Arab Emirates have frozen the assets of the Kinahan drug trafficking gang, adding to international pressure on an organization that has deep ties with boxers and promoters at the highest levels of the sport. The Gulf state said it was continuing to investigate the Irish organized crime group in parallel with the authorities in the United States, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Spain. The relevant authorities cooperate closely on cases involving foreign elements. In line with the UAE's international commitments and national legal framework for combating illicit activity, the government said, the asset freeze includes all personal and corporate bank accounts. One person briefed on the matter in the UAE said,
A lot of people felt Daniel Kinahan found asylum abroad.
whilst being pursued by authorities in Ireland, authorities in the United Kingdom, he found refuge in Dubai.
Not anymore.
The announcement of the asset freeze on one of Europe's most notorious crime syndicates comes after the U.S. Treasury last week imposed sanctions on the Kinahan Group and 7 of its members, including its Irish leaders, Christopher Kinahan and his 2 sons, Daniel and Christopher Jr., who are based in Dubai. The U.S. also put a $5 million price on the heads of Kinahan Sr., better known as Christie or the Dapper Don, and his sons. The U.S. accused the Kinahans of smuggling narcotics into Europe and engaging in money laundering, frequently using Dubai as a facilitation hub for its illicit activities.
They were outside of the UK's jurisdiction.
Regardless of what they were being accused of, abroad, the UK couldn't do much about it.
Until the United States and the UAE got involved.
They needed them to play ball. The cartel, which emerged in the late 90s, operates across Ireland, the UK, Spain, and the UAE. Irish courts have branded it as a murderous organization involved in the international trafficking of drugs and firearms, the United States said. The UAE has come under increasing scrutiny from Western partners over its record in fighting money laundering. The Financial Action Task Force, a global financial crime watchdog, last month placed the UAE on its gray list, stepping up its monitoring of the Gulf states' efforts to stem flows of dirty money. Dubai, a playground for the rich, has also attracted organized criminal gangs from the UK, as well as India and former Soviet states.
Walls are really closing in on Danny Boy, aren't they?
A combination of weak enforcement and investment opportunities for foreigners in sectors such as real estate and precious metals has created the perfect safe haven for criminals. According to a report by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the asset freeze targeting the Kinahans forms part of a drive to clean up the UAE's reputation and enhance cooperation with international law enforcement.
A couple of cops in Ireland accusing Danny of being a gangster don't mean much.
In the greater scheme of things, it doesn't. That would not have been enough to bring this about.
The UAE was the perfect place for Danny to get lost in the sauce.
Lost in translation. So many people spending so much money. Who the fuck cares how they got it, where they got it from?
Don't ask, don't tell, baby.
Oh, Danny boy, he's been doing business in Dubai for a long time. Safe haven.
Found asylum there, and it was business as usual until recently.
Something changed. Something definitely did. And I will say that Danny, he didn't do a good enough job of keeping a low profile.
Hey, let's just get that right out of the way.
You shouldn't be seen in pictures posing with prominent athletes. You don't need that kind of attention. You don't. There's gonna be people out there, they're never gonna believe you went straight. You might have sought refuge halfway around the world, in the Far East.
Those people in the West, they're still looking for you.
And they see you over there, posing with Western athletes they're familiar with.
Should have stayed underground then.
That's the first thing. Second thing is, Danny's operation grew too big to hide.
Out of the clear blue sky, you start seeing Daniel Kinahan all over the place.
Out of the clear blue sky, MTK Global, who he was associated with.
Yeah, he helped found that company.
Out of the clear blue sky, you see all these fighters, many familiar fighters. They're in bed with MTK Global. And then out of the clear blue sky comes Probellum, a company that formed late last year in October. They gain all this traction so fast with so many people, so many outfits around the world. The implications of this situation on the sport of boxing are not to be underestimated.
Because if Probellum is implicated, then so's everybody associated with
At least
it.
upper-level management. At least Richard Schaefer, who's supposed to be Probellum's president. He's supposed to be the guy that launched this company.
Oh, granted, plausible deniability might work for the fighters.
Plausible deniability might work for those fighters and their trainers, their teams. Plausible deniability might work at the ground level. But when it comes to upper-level management, the people that helped get this company off the ground, namely Richard Schaefer, plausible deniability.
It's just not plausible.
Probellum, as a company, they haven't been sanctioned yet. Not by the U.S.
It
government.
seems like it's only a matter of time before they are.
It's going down, and it's all downhill from here. Dublin News Live earlier today tweeted, Christopher Kinahan and his two sons, Daniel and Christopher, are expected to be arrested in the UAE and extradited back to Ireland. The UAE has frozen the assets of the Kinahan organized crime group, whose leaders are based in Dubai.
There's obviously more going on here than just boxing.
But as it pertains to boxing, once Daniel Kinahan sets foot in Ireland and he's brought to justice,
Details are divulged about the inner workings of his operation.
when names get named, how many people do you think are going to be able to use plausible deniability?
How many people at Probellum? How many people at MTK?
Fighters and their level of involvement to the more nefarious inner workings of Daniel Kinahan's crime syndicate, his organization. Plausible deniability might be an adequate defense for them. Many of them may not know anything about it. They might not be involved.
It's upper-level management you gotta look at.
Those who would know, where exactly is the revenue stream for these shows and this entire operation? Where exactly is that revenue stream coming from?
And that's how all of this pertains to boxing.
The shit's about to hit the fan in a big way. Daniel Kinahan and his family's assets are frozen. He's being extradited back to Ireland. He's being brought to justice, and shortly, names are going to get named.
I'm sure a lot of people right now are getting hot in the collar, sweating bullets.
Daniel didn't keep a low profile, he didn't, but that couldn't have been the only reason that all of a sudden his entire operation is coming down.
Well, the United States government sanctioning him certainly was a game changer.
Now, I didn't think much of it at first, but it seems that the United States government sanctioning Daniel Kinahan is what coaxed the UAE to get involved. A couple of cops in Ireland accusing him of being a gangster don't mean much in the greater scheme of things, but when the U.S. government got involved, it seems...
Well, that's when everything started falling apart.
Shit's about to hit the fan in a big way, and yes, it does pertain to the sport of boxing. And finally, on to more boxing-related boxing news. ESPN very recently updated their pound-for-pound ranked standings, and Errol Spence Jr. seems to have made a considerable move, a move that has a lot of people upset. It's ruffled some feathers. The list was sent to me because, well, somebody wants to know what I think.
All right.
And if you want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, they've got Errol Spence Jr. for unifying titles with Yordenis Ugas this past weekend. They've got him ranked in at number 5, ahead of Alexander Usyk, ahead of Tyson Fury, who... not even on my list because pound-for-pound lists, generally speaking, aren't for heavyweights.
They're not.
Ahead of Vasyl Lomachenko, ahead of Juan Francisco Estrada, ahead of Josh Taylor. Essentially, they have Errol Spence Jr. ranked ahead of more decorated, more accomplished fighters than he is. And if these fighters are more decorated, they're multi-weight champions. Some have been unified and undisputed champions.
Wait a minute, if they're more decorated and more accomplished than he is, then why is he ranked ahead of them?
I just told you, ESPN's pound-for-pound list, their criteria, it's based on a panel of votes. They're not looking at these fighters individually and measuring them all by the same metric. What they're doing is they're getting a bunch of people together and tallying their votes. And if Errol Spence Jr. gets a bunch of votes, he ends up at number 4.
Now, if you get a different bunch of people together...
Get a different sample survey from a different group. the structure of the list and how the names fall in line, it's going to be different because it's opinion-based.
It's not fact-based like the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list.
On the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, Errol Spence ain't in the top 5. He ranks in the bottom tier at number 9.
Why, you ask?
Because it makes absolutely no fucking sense at all to rank Errol Spence Jr. ahead of, say, Alexander Usyk. What Errol Spence Jr. has spent the last 5 years since winning the IBF title, since winning the red belt, what he's spent the last 5 years trying to do, Usyk already did that. He did that on the road. He did it on foreign soil. Every single alphabet title he won from a champion, in their neck of the woods, in their backyard, which is a lot more difficult to do than fighting at home.
Errol Spence only won 1 title on the road.
Just 1. And that's noteworthy, it is. But Alexander Usyk, he won every single alphabet title he's ever won on the road. Every title at cruiserweight and every title at heavyweight. Lest we forget, Usyk is a 2-division champion. Errol is not. He's only ever been a champion at 1 weight. Usyk has been an undisputed champion, whereas Errol Spence Jr., 5 years later, 5 years since winning the IBF title, he still hasn't.
It only took Usyk 2 years to become an undisputed champion at his weight.
He fought 3 active reigning world champions at cruiserweight, the same way that Errol Spence Jr. fought 3 active world champions at welterweight. But the difference is Usyk actually accomplished that goal, what Errol Spence Jr. is still trying to do. And not only did Usyk become his division's undisputed champion, he became a unified champion at heavyweight. All while Errol Spence Jr. is still trying to unify the welterweight division. So make it make sense. What precedence is there to rank Errol ahead of Usyk?
There isn't one unless it's a popularity contest.
And that's all that ESPN's pound-for-pound list is. It's not an accurate measure of skill, a skills assessment based on the quality of competition and the number of accolades a fighter amasses throughout their professional career. As a testament to how skilled they are, it's not that.
It's a popularity contest.
It's a tally of votes. And what motivates those votes? Well, your guess is as good as mine. Recency bias, nationality, and race bias, your guess is as good as mine.
But it's not an accurate measure of skill.
Since Errol Spence Jr. hasn't actually proved that he's a more skilled fighter than an Alexander Usyk, how could that be? Alexander Usyk's a lot more accomplished in less time.
He has quite literally accomplished more in less time than Errol Spence Jr. has.
And why circumstances? Because every alphabet title this guy won, he won on the road. He won it in the other guy's backyard. You know how difficult that is to do in the sport of boxing. He beat Krzysztof Blavatsky in Poland. He beat Murat Gassiev in Russia. He beat Maris Briedis in Latvia. He beat Anthony Joshua in the United Kingdom.
You're telling me beating Kel, Sean, and Ugas is better than that?
It doesn't make sense, and I don't expect it to. When these popular periodicals like ESPN,
when they do this, they lessen the value of what it actually means to be an undisputed champion.
or a unified champion for that matter, because you'll notice that Jermell Charlo, Errol's countryman, his buddy, he's not even on this list, and he's a unified champion in possession of the same number of alphabet titles as Errol. But unlike Errol, he is his division's lineal Ring Magazine champion.
What the hell's any of that worth if they're going to rank Errol ahead of him anyway?
When the praise from the pundits is not distributed evenly throughout the sport, it lessens the meaning and lessens the value of becoming a unified and/or undisputed champion.